Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Before we get started on our next presentation, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are accepting donations, and there is a PayPal link in the chat. I think it's at earlier today, 1:51. Or Alice, if you could stick it in the chat again. Oh, there you go. Thank you there's a QR code. And then there also is a survey link that allows you to complete the survey anytime during any of the presentations. So we appreciate your feedback there. On to our presentation. Diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't just a necessity in today's business world. It's a smart business strategy that allows us to learn and grow from multiple and differing perspectives, sparking creativity and innovation. In an industry that serves all people, typically at a time of great need, it is imperative for insurers to hire and promote a diverse workforce, enhancing their ability to serve a wide range of customers, thus making diversity, equity, and inclusion a top priority for businesses. Our speaker on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is Precious Norman Walton. Precious is the co-founder and president of Lovejoy Risk Management Corporation, based in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas metro area. With over 15 years of insurance industry experience, she has served in personal lines claims, commercial underwriting, and agency management. Prior to her current role, Precious was Vice President of Account Management for Insuron, Vice President of Agency Operations for Lucky Truck, and Chief Operating Officer for Diamond National Insurance Advisors. Precious is a member of the CPCU Society Leadership Council and Vice Chair of InterRisk 2022. She also served as the 2020 President of the Dallas chapter of the CPCU Society and is currently their Director of Programs. I had to ask her to include this today in her bio because she didn't share that with me, but I'm going to share it. Precious is a winner of the 2022 Elite Woman Award bestowed by the Insurance Business America, and was recently highlighted in a Wall Street Journal article titled, "Gray Hair is a New Power Move for Women in the Workplace." This article reflects what I admire about Precious. She's authentic and she's real. So let's give a warm welcome to Precious Norman Walton.
Oh man, that's amazing. I need to bring you with me everywhere like that. That warm introduction just fills my cup. Good afternoon. I am so excited to be here with you. I'm joining you today from the great state of Texas. I'm actually down here in Houston. I had the pleasure earlier this afternoon of sharing some thoughts and insights with their new designees. So super exciting. And thanks to technology, I can jump from Houston to the West Coast like with a click of a button. So Hawaii, California, look, you guys are near and dear to my heart. So I don't think you can see it. Look, I'm okay. Move the camera. Forgive me here. Like I'm donning I have a little hibiscus pin that I wear when I speak, especially to new designees, because I'm part of the 2016 class. So that was Hawaii is when I became a CPCU. I also grew up in Hawaii. My dad was in the Air Force. So Hickam Air Force Base is home. So I'm Kama'aina. So for the Hawaii chapter, you guys know what that means. So I just wanted to share that to kind of kick that off. So I will share my screen here. I'm working off of a laptop, so bear with me. Hopefully I do this without embarrassing myself too much to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all the things that were mentioned, that I do, all the different ways that we identify, it really brings the point home that the diversity of experience that we have, diversity of thought, diversity is so much more than the boxes that you check when you do the census every 10 years. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, okay, hold on, let me share screen. I can do this. Okay, here we go. Let me share it and hopefully you can see it here with all my diverse faces. Okay, I'm seeing a nod. You can see my screen. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this. And so some of these slides are from a presentation that I did earlier this year for the society via a webinar, just talking about where we are as an industry, why DEI is so important, especially to be able to serve the communities that we're in and have that presence of mind, that compassion, that it really takes in order for us to gain the trust of the public, because that is entirely necessary for what we do. If we don't have their buy-in, and if we aren't able to communicate that we live where they live, we work where they work, our kids go to school, in these neighborhoods, then, it really feels, again, it's an opportunity that we may be missing. And so what I'm going to share with you over the next couple of minutes are just some thoughts, some takeaways when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially within the insurance industry. First of all, before I dive into that, I didn't realize I was going behind Chris. That's always fun. I was like, man, no pressure, right? But what I really love is that the CPCU Society has really taken some major steps towards walking the walk and talking the talk. And so one of our strategic objectives is to, put a intentional focus on DEI in our in all the things that we do. As CPCUs, as members of the society, we're not a monolith. We come from all different stages, phases, ages, you name it, and really what we all contribute when we come together makes us, that's what makes being here and being a part of this so amazing, is that you get to tap into all of that wealth of knowledge as part of the society. And so one of the things that I like to say when it comes to DEI, really when it comes to any sort of kind of project management, because really and truly anything that has a beginning and an end is a project. And so this is kind of more of a perpetual project, if you will. So I'm going to flip-flop hats a little bit as I talk through, not slides, here we go, talk through DEI. And it's important to understand that I approach it from a really interesting perspective. So I come at it not only as a CPCU and a fellow insurance nerd, but I'm also a certified professional with SHRM. So that's the Society Human Resource Management. So I'm an HR nerd. And so I like to study the trends and kind of hear the chatter, specifically how it pertains to our ecosystem within the insurance world. And so what we saw, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, was that my two worlds started to collide. All of a sudden, the HR element and the insurance, more specifically the risk management piece, really started to figure out how they dovetail into one another. And so a lot of what I speak on and what I emphasize for organizations, for-profit, nonprofit employers, is that DEI is more than just the right thing to do. It's more than just a moral imperative, that it really impacts not even just bottom lines. There's countless studies that are out there that prove time and time again that more diverse teams tend to be more profitable, more innovative. So all of that's well and fine, but then also lack of representation, not having the right decision makers at the table to call out the blind spots, becomes an exposure. It becomes an issue, because if you don't have someone that would tell you that, hey, it's a great idea, certain big box retailer, that you want to celebrate Juneteenth, ice cream may not be the way to go. So that was a recent faux pas that we saw. And I guarantee you, if they had the right people at the table making that decision, that's something that they may have been able to sort out internally before it became kind of the laughing stock of the moment. And so when I talk about what gets measured gets done, we have to move beyond just the lip service, the virtue signaling, showing up on social media with a great hashtag, with a new picture for the company brochure. And we really have to quantify, where are we today and where is it that we'd like to go? Because just like anything else, like when we began our CPCU journeys as individuals, we knew what the finish line looked like. And so we were able to chart a course and say, okay, this this is how many exams within these quarters, that I can take on in addition to my day-to-day responsibility. And so it's really important that any organization that's really committed to doing the work has to do a self-assessment. So you really have to figure out, where are we today? And so there are some metrics that are really being adopted across the board that really help organizations to understand where they are, so that they know how much improvement and over what period of time, and also how many resources they're willing to commit in order to get it done. And so being able to track it, I always compare it to, I have my oldest daughter who is a college student now. I'm still getting used to saying that out loud, so bear with me, guys. It's like an emotional moment, but my daughter, yes, is a college student. And I remember when she was finishing high school that she was struggling in a particular subject area. And so we definitely saw the need to get her enrolled and participate in some tutoring in that subject matter. And so when we signed up for the tutoring, the onboarding process, the first thing that it asks, of course, is what is her current grade? What are the areas in which she struggles? And so we plotted all of that out. At the conclusion of her tutoring program, we were able to see marked improvement in the various areas. So we have to have a beginning, we have to have a goal, and we have to have a way to track it, because everything that you can make promises, but what gets measured gets done. Because now you can go back and look and see, are we actually making gains in the directions that we want? Or is this something that we're just saying that we're interested in because it's the hot button topic of the day, and we really haven't committed to putting one foot in front of the other? One of the other benefits in having this data to track is that when you have facts, when you have hard data, when you have metrics, now we're removing that emotional component that comes with DEI. This isn't just a pet project. This isn't just a cause that I'm passionate about because I have a stake in the game. This is something that we know is necessary from a risk management standpoint, from an employment standpoint, from all of those things that we just discussed. But we can make data-driven decisions and say, these are the ways that are proven, these are the things that we know we need to implement in order to be able to move the needle. And so when we think about diversity, just naturally, we tend to focus on those areas that the EEOC protects, in terms of, oh, me and this mouse. Okay. The standard ones, right? This is the, as I mentioned earlier, the stuff that we track when you do the census every decade, the age, the race, the gender, gender identity, religion, things like that. So the difficulty that I run into when we have these conversations about DEI is most participants fall into two categories. Either you're in a non-leadership position with your organization, and you say, Precious, I understand that we've got to do better, but I really don't know how I have anything to do with that. I'm not in HR, I'm not a hiring manager, I'm not on the front line, I don't make those decisions. So I agree, but I don't know how any of this pertains to me and what I can do. And then on the flip side, I give this presentation to leaders and organizations, and it just feels like such a big undertaking that people become discouraged. And oftentimes as a DEI practitioner, what I hear is, well, we want to do something, like we're all on board. We know that we need to be doing something, but we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to offend. And we really don't know what it is that would be the most meaningful. And so this is where it's important to understand, especially for organizations that have like ERG groups that are in place. I love employee resource groups, as long as we focus on that middle letter, which is the R for resource. ERGs are designed to be more than just a social club. It should be more than just gathering together and commiserating about how we all have, similar struggle, and we come together to, just kind of talk and nothing comes out of it. So from an HR perspective, I encourage leaders and all organizations that your ERG groups ought to be a platform that's used to really hear what the collective need may be. because it can possibly be that the ERG reports up through a liaison or someone and says that this particular group feels like they don't have enough opportunities with mentorship. Maybe there's not enough people in leadership that reflect that particular group, that demographic. And so now companies can actually take action based on knowing that it's not just the request of a single individual, but the ERG as a collective is able to, give that feedback so the organizations can really meaningfully and genuinely, take strides and efforts and invest resources into things that are really going to have impact. So this grid that I have in front of you, this idea of intersectionality, it's really important when we talk about DEI because we're not two-dimensional people. Well, maybe on Zoom we are, but in real life, we're not. And so understanding that it is completely possible for there to be overlap in these various areas. So I'll speak to myself because I'm the only one qualified to, I'm the only the subject matter that I can speak of freely. So I am a first generation American citizen on my mother's side of the family. My mother's from Thailand. She married my father during the Vietnam War. My father is a retired Air Force veteran, hence the Hawaii connection. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a woman of color in leadership. I speak fluent Spanish. There's all of these different layers that go into who I am. And so it is really difficult, especially the military background, when people ask a simple question like, where are you from? Well, who wants to know? Like, what is really the root of that question? Are you asking me my ethnicity in terms of who my mother is and who my father is, like from an ancestry.com perspective? Are you trying to figure out where I grew up? Are you trying to figure out where I have family, where I am physically right now? Like, for a lot of people, I realize that might not be a loaded question. But when we ask employees to basically pick a banner to stand under, it is super important to understand how you have all of these different elements that collide in the center of this graphic, which is where we sit in the middle of this intersectionality. Now, in addition to the fact that we have this overlap, the concept of intersectionality itself was actually a term that was derived from a paper written by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw with the Columbia Law School. And so in this particular paper where the phrase was coined, what she realized is that when you have individuals that belong to multiple marginalized demographics, that the combined outcome is actually stronger than individually. So in her particular paper in the Chicago Legal Forum, it was demarginalizing the intersection of race and sex. And so the takeaway was, if you have an individual who is of a minority race on top of the fact that they're female, that the compounded impact tends to be more severe. And so what does that have to do with DEI? Why are we talking about intersectionality and this compounding effect that happens when we look at intersectionality? And it is really important to understand that since we're complex human beings that hail from all sorts of backgrounds, that sometimes there are things that can disproportionately impact a certain group for better or worse due to the fact that they belong to multiple groups. What we saw on the HR level, so I keep switching hats here, with the pandemic, is that the ability to work from home, the remote work opportunity, was one that was not readily available across the spectrum. We found that communities that traditionally have done more in person, especially hospitality roles, you can't Zoom in your job at the grocery store. You can't be a Zoom waiter. Well, I guess you can. They have like the little bots now that carry the trays. But anyway, the bigger point being there was a skill gap that existed. And so as employees were able to work remotely, and then the pandemic played out the way that it did, and now we know there's safety measures, there's vaccinations. And by the way, this is not intended to be a controversial presentation. There's a lot of return to the office. Going home, there were a lot of assumptions that we made about our workforce. First of all, the assumption that everyone had a dedicated space and access to internet was a huge assumption, because we gave away hardware, but we really didn't think much about where is this employee going to be able to work undisturbed, focused in their home. Not everyone has a study or office or a library where they could set up. And so when organizations make changes, even though the changes may affect the entire organization, the entire department, it is totally possible, based on an individual's situation, what groups they relate to, that there may be disproportionate impact. So decision makers, is really important that as we look to diversify our workforces, that we also track the data and are able to determine how are some of these changes, which are rolled out unilaterally, impacting certain groups in a way that we need to bring in, again, the E of DEI, the equity piece. Because especially right now, where we've seen fluctuations due to inflation on gas prices, requiring employees to return to the office may cause undue stress to those that maybe are in a different socioeconomic class. And so while a lot of us are able to fill up at the tank, and we're thankful for the little bit of relief that we've had from the summertime, wages have not fluctuated the way gas prices have. And so I would argue that, what the margins that employees have when they're able to work from home can vary according to their financial situation. There are people who unfortunately are having to leverage credit in order to get through, some of these economic times. And so there's interest rates. Again, it's a whole thing. We're not going to unpack the whole box, but just bringing to your awareness that having diverse teams means that we have to take a different perspective and approach to how we engage with our teams, with our employees, and even with our prospects. So I will definitely share, and I think for the most part, everyone in the room has heard a couple of these terms that have really started trending, especially when it comes to employment, and in insurance, probably even more so. When the pandemic first started, maybe about 6 months in, we started to hear about this great resignation. So this great resignation, and a lot of people envision that, just people just walking off en masse, throwing their, uniforms on the ground and say, singing, "We're not going to take it," as they, walk out the door. But I don't really think that's the way, that planned out. In the insurance industry specifically, what we have found is that a lot of the jobs that have become open right now, have actually been driven by early retirement. And so early retirement was a really interesting thing, because when you combine kind of the perfect storm of the pre-existing conditions, so it was more problematic for those that had chronic conditions to, reemerge and go back into these public spaces. With the surge in real estate, all of a sudden you have individuals that the equity in their homes shot up. At the same time, maybe the balances in their retirement accounts did. And so a lot of folks that we know, we had been facing this crisis for years. The whole situation was really escalated and sped up because of the pandemic. And so when we have these mass retirements, and we haven't been doing traditionally a great job of backfilling and creating this pipeline, it's brought us to where we are now. And so as employers, as organizations, we have to do better at really articulating what is our value proposition. It's got to be more than your compensation package, your salary, all those perks that used to work before. Culture has changed. Culture has changed indefinitely. The things that people have taken away from this entire experience is, number one, life's not guaranteed. You can have someone who was peak of health and then all of a sudden in the ICU in a matter of days when the pandemic first began. And so people really started thinking about, does the work I do matter? Am I making an impact? Or do I feel good? Am I proud of the organization, that I work for? And so all these factors are now things that we have to be mindful of. And our reputations as being walking the walk, in addition to talking the talk, this is what a lot of employees are considering when they're making shifts. So while the rest of the industry, well, the rest of the economy called it the Great Resignation, what we saw in insurance specifically was more so the Great Reshuffle. So we saw where people were able to cross the street, work for a competitor, and realize increases sometimes 20, 30%. I mean, it was just bananas. It became kind of just a talent grab. Everyone was trying to backfill and be proactive even in making sure they had the right people. And then that quickly transitioned into what a lot refer to as the Great Regret. So with the Great Regret, you had employers that had paid a premium for new hires that were quickly finding out they probably weren't able to perform at that level to justify that compensation. We saw employees that crossed the street because the grass was greener and the pay was higher and didn't really think a whole lot about what happened when they sacrificed the tenure at their prior employer, or if the culture was different. So we've gone through all these different iterations, and what we really need to understand is that part of what the evaluation is, beyond Glassdoor, beyond Indeed, and some of the places, being known as an employer of choice, an organization of choice, representation absolutely matters. So on this slide, I know that I've done that personally as well, where I've been extended job offers or opportunities to interview. And the very first thing that I do at my due diligence is I check out their website. You know, what is their backstory? Who is their board? Who's making decisions? And if that tends to reflect, if it lacks diversity, I was struggling for the right words there, then that is something that I would consider overall. Is there room for advancement? Because if no one in the middle or senior levels of management looks like me, then I can't envision myself being able to plug in and grow, with an organization. So we also have to be mindful again that we're not saying that the leadership has to look completely different than the organization as a whole, but is there those same proportion of people? Again, does the leadership represent the rest of the employees? Does the leadership of your chapter look like your overall membership? So these are all things that we need to be mindful of. Not that we elevate people into positions that they haven't earned from a merit basis, but that we're providing opportunities as well for those that are already with us, working for us, volunteering with us, to continue to hone their skills and to increase their ability to rise. And so some of these stats that we've been following in the HR world, the HR side of the world, have a lot to do with in-house, really taking a deeper dive, being able to pivot, run all of these reports to say, okay, so within our organization, from the demographics, this is the percentage that identify male, female, binary, whatever the case may be. This is what the salary spread is. This is what the longevity spread looks like. And it seems like our highest turnover tends to be, because you can put together, reports that really show some of these areas. So if I have a problem retaining employees with a certain age bracket, then we may need to look at, are we making a compelling case, not just to recruit them? Because again, as someone who hails from an agent and broker background in the insurance world, if you spend all the money on marketing and none of it on retention, you're not going to grow a book. And the same can be said for organizations. That diversity is not just the task of your recruiters and of your hiring managers, but if it's not something that is adopted throughout every layer, every touch point, then it comes across even worse than not diverse. Now we're running the risk of being hypocritical. So what you're going to notice as we kind of talk through the different elements of DEI is that at this stage, at this phase of the game, we shouldn't be rehashing DEI 101 over and over again. I think at this point, we should be pretty comfortable with the acronym, what the letters stand for, the difference between the letters, and not to say that it's not beneficial to review that and to understand that. And absolutely, if that's something that you still don't quite understand, I would really encourage you to connect with the IDEA committee with the CPCU Society. We are doing fantastic work work there, and they can definitely help you understand allyship and how to get involved. The focus on this presentation today are really next steps. Okay, we got the letters, got it. Okay, it's a good thing, got it. How do we do this? Well, how do we actually turn this into action? What are some of the things that we can be doing that really help to move the needle? And so I'm showing here from, again, the hiring perspective. I'm going to get a hang of this mouse. I'm using this trackpad on this laptop is wearing me out. Okay, so if we talk about just, again, identifying how did we get to this place? So if we don't have a diverse, organization, where did that start? And so there are biases, and we all have biases. And that's also another opportunity. If you've never taken the test, I believe Harvard, if you go to their website, and again, this test exists in a lot of different places now, where you can walk through, and it kind of helps you to identify some of the unconscious biases that we all hold. And so what we found in the recruiting space is that oftentimes if your last hire graduated from this particular school, then you're probably more likely to go back to that school for your recruiting efforts. But only focusing your efforts like on one campus sometimes can limit who starts off at the top of the funnel. And so if the top of the funnel isn't bringing in enough diversity, then obviously who trickles down to the bottom is never going to be diverse either. Why do certain individuals not apply for posted positions? I'm seeing more and more where employers are starting to include some of the diversity statements, even on their job posts, that they're committed to, hiring from a particular community or a particular demographic or particular geographic area. And so these are things that applicants want to know. The members that are joining your chapters, especially when you're in an area where it is very possible that where they live is in a different place from where they work. And so they have choices with the CPC Society as far as where they want to tie their membership. And if they feel that being a part of a different chapter is going to give them access to, different content, different networking opportunities, there may be reasons why people are drawn to or even shy away from what we have going on. And so it's very important that we at least take a moment to identify, why does everyone who comes our way tend to look or identify in this very narrow spectrum, and what are some things that we can do to get beyond that? Sometimes you're too close to the matter. So what I'm really excited about is seeing this uptick of DEI practitioners that hail from all sorts of different spaces. And if it's necessary to contract with an outside consultant that can come in and really help you to find your blind spots, that's totally acceptable. And there should definitely be, the question comes up a lot as far as budget. Where do you account for this when you're looking at your overall expenditures? And I would say that this is not just an HR problem. Again, this is definitely a risk management problem. But we also need to look at overall, if you hire diverse and if you're able to retain diverse, then a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. It is expensive to replace roles right now. So if you can do better with who's in your organization and help them develop, then it's definitely, the ROI is there. So I'll touch on this just a little bit here in terms of training and development, because oftentimes when we, again, think about DEI, we focus on the recruiting part, the front door, and we forget what happens once you've invited someone in the house. So everyone's at the party. Everyone's dancing. We've heard that analogy a lot with DEI, being invited to the dance, being, invited to dance itself. But one of the reasons people don't dance is sometimes you're not playing their song. Okay, so sometimes people get to a certain point and they feel like they've plateaued. They don't have people in leadership or even the next step up. I'm not even talking about like your board or, the top. But if I want to shadow someone, if I want to, follow someone's, story and their footsteps and walk that path, if there aren't enough people who represent, if I can't relate, then the mentorship is going to not be as powerful as it can be. And this is something, especially to the chapter leaders that are part of this I-Day today, to be mindful of, that when you think about your succession planning and when you think about the engagement of your chapter, make sure that the committees that are there, the volunteers are there. We all know about the 80-20 rule, where we have a small portion of our chapters that are super engaged engaged and the rest of them, they're paying dues. And so we still have a captive audience and a chance to bring them back in. But we need to think about, are we making a compelling case for them to come in, to engage, and to stay? So mentorship, stretch assignments. So I love stretch assignments, and that's probably one of the biggest takeaways with being a volunteer, is that when someone gains your CPCU designation, one of the frequently asked questions is, what do I do with this? Like, okay, I have it, I sacrificed to get it, now I have it in my hand. Is it just going to magically make my bank account increase? And sorry, guys. At least that wasn't my experience. You know, I can't show up with my CPCU card and all of a sudden get approved for a line of credit. There's some work, there's strategy, right? And so for those of us who have really taken off professionally after becoming CPCUs, being able to share that with others, you know, is really encouraging. But also from a longevity standpoint, I know Chris talked about that too. We have such an opportunity in front of us, and we just have to make sure that we've got enough diversity that people can identify being there, and we become a place, a destination of choice where people want to enter the risk management insurance field, unlike so many of us that kind of fell into it. That's for another time. Offboarding. Offboarding is one of those things that people assume to be more of a payroll benefits thing. You know, all right, so long, goodbye, because it comes one of two ways, voluntary and involuntary. And your voluntary resignations are a really good resource to tap to really get feedback on your organizations. Not just because, you know, yes, there are the ones that are disgruntled and you kind of have to weed through some of that, but they don't have a stake in the game anymore. They don't have anything to lose. And so they may be able to give you a heads up on some of the things in your ranks that are happening or not happening the way that you anticipated. And so really taking this information, and this could be not just an exit interview when it comes to your places of employment, but this also is applicable to your chapters, your volunteers. If someone's no longer available, this can also be applied to your, I was going to call it expiration list, to your list of members who don't renew, is to reach out and kind of get some feedback from them. Did you change employers maybe and employer support has been lost? Did you have a bad experience? Did you not feel like you were getting the value? And so we take that information, and this is one of those things that I will tell you guys, it takes some maturity to be able to do this without taking offense. So you've got to be able to hear what's being said and apply that in a positive way so that you can continue to grow. Because oftentimes what you're finding out during the offboarding process is they're voicing things that others feel but won't say because you're still there. So I want to make sure that I take an opportunity to open it up and address, you know, questions, concerns, because DEI is a big undertaking, and I'm excited that so many organizations, especially within insurance, are taking these strides and are really prioritizing and putting a focus on getting this right. I know that buy-in is still a difficult area for us because unfortunately with all the terms, all the words that are floating out there, that there's been some conflation, there's been some mincing and mixing of things that are not related, things that DEI is not. DEI is not affirmative action 2.0. DEI was never designed to place people simply based on characteristics that are outside of the role. So that's not what this is. I'm not going to go down the road of some other acronyms that tend to be a little bit more polarizing, but allowing people the opportunity not just to join, but to grow, to develop, and to shine. It's a win-win. It's a win-win it's a win-win proposal for all involved. Organizations thrive. We're able to open the door. And oftentimes it's not the message, it's the messenger. And so if we're attracting the right people, their testimony, if you will, may resonate with a group that maybe yours cannot. And so we need to think beyond what are we doing? This isn't to punish us and slap us on the wrist for the things that we're not doing, but this is really to encourage and to reinforce all of the reasons why DEI is something that we absolutely need, especially within the insurance industry. So I haven't been following the chat. I was so engrossed in my presentation here, but I do want to take a moment and open it up and see if there's any specific questions that you guys have as far as this topic goes.
If I, Precious, can make a comment, you talked about offboarding and exit interviews. It seems it would be beneficial for employers to actually have stay interviews and retention interviews. So as an employee they're currently employed, then you can get immediate feedback and halt something from happening, from the employee from leaving the company. Wouldn't that make sense?
So a lot of times in the HR space, we kind of refer to that as like a counteroffer, when someone is ready to leave, and then we change things in the hopes of retention. I've seen that go either way. I'll use a more personal example. My husband and I have been married for 10 beautiful years. Absolutely love my husband. And, I think about, if he waited for me to pack my bags and once the Uber has been hailed, it's probably not the time to tell me that you love me and you want me to stay, right? And so we need to be thoughtful of that, because sometimes the takeaway, even though it's well intended, especially when it comes to compensation, that's a very slippery slope, because sometimes the takeaway is going to be, well, if you knew that I was undervalued and underpaid, why did it take a threat of separation to get some, parity as far as, what my peers are making? So yes and no. Oftentimes, those interviews, and you often have to, again, source what is the reason this is happening? Because sometimes there's things beyond your control. Someone's leaving, they're relocating, that a change, in life, and that's totally okay. But if they're leaving for reasons that, and they're bringing it to your awareness that they're leaving, I always honor someone's decision, because if you talk them down, again, that's just such a slippery slope that you have to be mindful that it doesn't, oh, okay, fine, I'll give you the money that I should have gave you anyway. That typically the statistics say that if an employee stays after a counter offer, they don't stay long. The questions, thoughts? I know I kind of ran through a lot of info here, guys.
So Precious, this is David Russell, and it's you're an intimidating public speaker. You don't trip over any words. Your vocabulary is very impressive. So I'll try to rise to something close to your level. I found it interesting that when you thought about applying to an employer, you looked at the website, and you looked at it in a way I'd never thought about. You looked at the leadership. And this is sort of a chicken and the egg problem. How do you get a leadership change to accommodate and attract people of color, and to refresh your workforce when the people at the top may not be ready, willing, and maybe they're doing a perfectly fine job? So a company that's dominated by white males, you might not consider, when in fact they're desperate to get you and let's just for this hypothetical, pretend the right reasons. So how does a company change in that difficult circumstance?
That is a great question, because it is a chicken and the egg conundrum here. And what I found is that the way that DEI has tended to play out in several organizations, that I try to avoid generalizations, is that typically the first change to happen is a gender change. So you go from all white males, and all of a sudden there's a female. So it's normally the first endeavor into trying to diversify. Typically, and I could go through the ranks in terms of how that trickles down. So I read an article here in the last couple of weeks that was really fascinating to me. And it said that organizations that appoint a Black female CEO typically find a temporary spike in their valuations. What? How can that even, what's the correlation there? And so I read a little deeper, and I think it was the Washington Post that posted this. And they said the reason why is because by the time a Black female even has the opportunity to be appointed to that sort of position, she's typically way overqualified. She typically has twice the education, the experience of the counterparts in order for her even to make it there. And so that really just kind of took me aback, and I thought about that. And so things that they can do, and that's part of the reason why there's such hesitation to buy in. It's embarrassing to share the GPA before the tutoring. It's painful to say we're not there and this is why we're not there. So I'll use another cross example as well. So one of the things, I don't remember if it was mentioned in this bio, is that I'm an instructor for the Insurance Journal, their Academy of Insurance. And when I connected to their director of education a couple of years ago, he actually responded to a post I'd done on LinkedIn. We had an amazing conversation. And he said, Precious, I'll be really candid with you. Like, that is an area that we have not really done great at. And if you go to their website at the time, and you pulled it up, they have a whole page of all of the instructors, and it looked like a black and white yearbook. Many of who might actually be on this call, who are part of, their group, and that's fine. And so in 2020, I think it was, I actually integrated the roster of instructors with the Insurance Journal, which was just bananas that you would scroll through and I have an 8-year-old son, and he was singing that Sesame Street song, one of these things is doing its own thing. It was pretty obvious that my headshot was a little different. So being transparent about where you are, having some sort of statement and say, hey, this is the way things are today, but these are the things that we're doing. These are the ways that we're supporting the LGBTQ, community. These are the things that we're, how we're mentoring at HBCUs. These are the things that we're doing to get beyond where we are. And I think that goes a lot way, and that resonates, that, okay, they care enough to try. And if I see that they care enough to try, they may not be there yet. And then I say, that's someone that I can lend some assistance to, that's still open to making real change. So I hope that answer helps.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Oh, come on, let's not be shy. I kid. It's a lot. And hopefully the takeaway here is that we all have a part to play. And it could be something as simple as taking the time and the effort to pronounce someone's name the proper way. That's probably the quickest and easiest way that you can honor someone, using their preferred pronouns. So I recently made a post / rant, maybe, because I use a hyphenated last name, and I've run into such opposition where people are opposed to that. Oh, your husband must have been. No, my reasons are my reasons, and using one name or the other is not an option I've left on the table for you. You have to honor that. You wouldn't chop off the CPCU because the signature was too long. Let's not, do that with the name. Elevating others, amplifying others. Maybe there's someone in your organization that you notice in meetings doesn't feel comfortable to contribute. If you pull them back in, like, hey, during that, David and I had a really great conversation. David, do you care to share with them? Give credit where credit is due. There's so many of these. We talk about microaggressions. There's these, kind of micro compliments too that we can integrate that help others feel welcome. So yeah, this is something that we all have the ability to help move the needle. Oh, I see hands.
Yeah, this is Alice. I have a question. I wonder if you saw the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services. They did a study about diversity and inclusion, holding America's largest insurance companies accountable. I was wondering what your thoughts were. Now, these are kind of data that I think they don't really share within the company, but they had to share it with the U.S. House Committee. But I find the difficulty actually is just getting the data. And this is the closest thing I have seen about data.
Yes, and that is an excellent point. So what we're starting to see now, like some more let me put the insurance hat back on, the risk management side, specifically when it comes to like EPLI and D&O, is we're starting to see a lot of derivative action because stakeholders are not pleased with their boards not being very forthcoming or really championing change. So depending on, especially publicly traded companies, it's very similar to what the federal government does with procurement. Right. And so if you are a contractor and you want to bid on something, maybe to, repair the parking lot at the local elementary school, if you are an SBA certified, economically disadvantaged, women owned, veteran owned, there's all these different certifications that you get. And it actually gives you like preference points when you go to bid for government work, because they have standards they're held to. They have percentages, like a certain percentage of the jobs. Like if they need pencils, they're not supposed to just go to the big box store and order it. They're supposed to see if there's vendors that are qualified in their communities, because they are the recipient of these funds. They have to, attempt to reinvest it. And so what we're starting to see now is that we have vendor diversity, which could be a whole nother meeting. There are different ways, and people are being held to account. And so the visibility is really hard, because today where we stand, there is no widely accepted metric. It's not like an AM Best rating where you can say, hey, they're A rated, right? And so we wrestle, because in the HR space, of course, privacy. And one of the things that, we shared, I was actually in Long Beach a couple weeks ago, my first trip to California, by the way. And I spoke at the RIMS conference, RIMS Western Conference. And one of the things that we talked about was that when it comes to diversity in the workplace, like we talked about those protected things, you have to allow people the opportunity to self-identify, because a lot of these questions you're not allowed to ask as an employer. You have to tell them what the data is going to be used for, because sometimes people are hesitant to share, if they have a identification that's outside of, what's typical in their role, because they don't want to be outed right at work. And so it's always got to be voluntary. And if people are afraid to disclose who and what they are, then you have a deeper issue at hand too. So yeah, these numbers, we're moving forward to that place, but it's not like a credit score. So it's really subjective, and it's hard to compare where one company stands versus another. But yep, I've been following that. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you.
All right, have I gone into extra innings? Is it overtime yet? I want to be timeful and mindful of the time that I was allotted. But I'm seeing hands, so I could do this all day. Well, no, I don't think. I don't. Yeah, I could. I probably shouldn't. You guys talking has never been an issue for me. So, do we have time for one more question, or where are we on our agenda? You said, yep. Okay. All right, go for it. I see Keith has a hand up. Or is a hand left up? Is that like a high five? Woohoo! Or anyone, jump out there, hit me with a question. She says I can do one more.
Okay, I can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Well,
I thought it was a high five.
I'm glad you lived in Hawaii, because I think you've experienced it firsthand, right? And what better subject matter for you to cover? So, here in Hawaii, our culture is very accepting of others, right? I think you've experienced that. So I guess from my perspective, I was just thinking more like, this issue is more a matter of teamwork and developing that team, right? Accepting people for who they are and the skills that they bring to the table, and then also the potential for those skills, and helping them succeed and flourish at those skills, right? Rather than trying to focus so much on ethnicity and race or gender, right? Or religious background, but more, how can we tap into this person and really get them to a point where they reach their potential, their fullest potential within your organization, and contribute towards the goal of the organization, right? I only see it that way just because of a sports background, because it's easy to win when you got all stars, but sometimes that becomes a problem too, because if they don't know how to work together, then you may fail, because these guys all just want to do their own thing versus working together, and you may have more success with less talent but people that work together better. I don't know, that's just my opinion on this.
Nope, that's spot on, and I really appreciate that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, I lived in Hawaii from the 2nd grade until my sophomore year of high school, so pretty much most of my childhood. Went to Radford, from Oahu, right? And I think about the culture shock of when I moved back to the mainland. So the Hawaii chapter understands. And I think about how I never understood or took much time to appreciate the fact that my lens, my exposure was different. My mom's from Thailand, my father's African American, so diversity in our household was always a thing. I grew up in Hawaii. So you guys are gonna laugh, like, I got, stateside and realized that spam musubi is not something that you get from the sushi restaurant, right? And I'm like, all of the McDonald's do not serve Portuguese sausage in the morning. I was like, there's so many things that I was really disappointed about, because I didn't realize that, again, the culture shock and the difference. And so when I think about organizations that come together and diversity and what people feel comfortable contributing, I think a lot about how people don't even recognize that their style of communication, their style of thought, like all of that is necessary. And so you may have someone who they have a bright idea, but they're afraid it's going to be shot down, maybe because they don't have the same number of letters behind their comma. They lack something. And so in order for people to feel comfortable sharing and contributing, you have to create safe spaces. And safe spaces, again, that's one of those hard pills to swallow, because everyone's like, what do you mean my space is not safe? Well, if people are hiding, last example, I remember, again, back when we worked in offices, right? What, 2 years ago, I used to have to pick and choose what I brought for lunch, because I had concerns that if I heated something up in the microwave in the break room, that there were going to be smells or things that, maybe my colleagues weren't comfortable with. And so I ended up dining out a lot, ordering out a lot, bringing, sandwiches or things like that, because I didn't know if they were ready for, the curry in the break room. Right. And so a lot of times we tamp down what's not accepted. And for years, that's been the mantra: for the sake of assimilation, we all have to, I don't care what you do outside of here. When you're here, we're team so-and-so. But I like to think that we're a mosaic, that all the different colors, all the different pieces really add to the beauty of it all. So we have to celebrate and recognize what makes us different, and how all those contributions, can get us to a better place. So no, thank you for sharing that. So that was more my Hawaii. So you guys know that I'm legit.
Yes, you are.
Thank you for that.
All
Well,
right,
guys, it has been a pleasure joining you and being able to participate in your event. I encourage you all, again, the need is there. We need all of you. We need your voices. We need you to volunteer. We need you to contribute. We need your flavor. So I'll end with this, because yes, I was raised in Hawaii, but my dad, inevitably, he retired in Louisiana. So I always have my little Louisiana thing to add, is that, the DEI is like creating a pot of gumbo. All of the different ingredients go into there, but the end result, the richness, the depth of flavor, is because they all come together and they marry during this process, and it brings it all out. When you eat it, you can still taste and feel the different textures and flavors and everything else. But that's really the place we have to get to, where we're not intimidated by one another, that we're not operating off of stereotypes and fear, but we recognize that when everyone can fully show up, that it means so much more. And so the Wall Street Journal article, because I know that it was mentioned about my gray hair. I made the decision as a DEI practitioner. I was feeling very hypocritical that I encourage people to show up fully and authentically. And so while I've been part of the society since 2016, everyone's always known me as Precious with the long, dark hair. It was about mid-back. During the pandemic, I decided that I was going to show up with my true colors, like no pun intended. And right before our leadership conference in April, I made the second decision, which was to cut off all of the processed hair. And so all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I've got like this short, like pixie cut. And so I shared it on LinkedIn, mostly so that my friends would recognize me when I got there. Like, oh, who's this new designee? Welcome. I'm like, no, it's me, right? So I shared this article about my decision to make this transition, and even recognizing that I was able to do so from a position of privilege, because I didn't have to worry about whether or not I was going to be looked at and viewed as being too old for roles and opportunities. I've kind of paid my dues, if you will. So I shared that out in April. About 3-4 weeks ago, I was contacted by a journalist from the Wall Street Journal. So she was writing a column on work-life issues, and she wanted to speak to women who had made this decision to transition to gray during the pandemic. Had no idea who I was as a professional, couldn't, CPCU is probably the furthest thing, I might as well have been speaking Greek, right? She just knew that I was a professional woman who decided to, go through this change. So I was super excited when I woke up, about 2 weeks ago, and my inbox was blowing up about, Precious, your face is in the Wall Street Journal. oh my gosh, like this article about, you and making these changes, and I think about that in terms of showing up fully. So whether you're going to ditch the heels, if it's the makeup for you, if it's the hair for you, whatever the case is, that those things don't define me as a professional. They don't define me, period. This is just something I did, because I have autonomy over, my body. So I encourage each of you to have the boldness to show up or not. That's your prerogative, and give others the grace and the space to do so. So that's what I've got for y'all today. It's been a pleasure hanging out, and I'm very active on LinkedIn as well as on Interact. So connect with me. This conversation, we can definitely continue it offline in different space and place, but it's been a pleasure to join you guys today.
Precious, thank you for having these conversations with us and reminding us that we all have a part. Thank you for continuing to make a difference and championing diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace so that we can realize a bigger and brighter future. So appreciate it. Appreciate your time. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Russell.
Thanks, Caron, and thank you, Precious. That was indeed insightful in so many ways. We're excited about you signing on, and now we're even more excited about what to do with what you've taught us.